Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Remote No Pressure Podcast. We're so glad that you joined us again this week. We're starting out this year with an unbelievable guest, Mr. Oliver White. And he's going to tell us all about how he got into fly fishing. He's going to talk about the incident that left him with a broken pelvis and how he left a job in finance to go into fly fishing full time. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It was unbelievable. Great guest. He's also, in this episode, what you're going to hear, it's awesome. You're going to hear about a kidnapping. You're going to hear about him saving a village. You're going to hear about him breaking his pelvis. I mean, everything you want, and fly fishing, everything you want in all these stories, all in one episode. This week also, don't forget, go to our website at remotenopressure.com. Sign up for our mailing list. Also, we've got the CDs back up there. If you go to the music section, I know a lot of people have been emailing me saying, hey, what happened to the CDs? I put them back up there. If you'd like to take a look at those, go to our website, click on music. You can check out the music. We also have a Spotify fly tying station. So it's actually a fly tying radio. We curated. I think that's right. We curated the playlist with some of y'all's favorite artists. If there's an artist on there that you'd like to hear, let me know. And that way we have, when you're fly tying here, it's January and it's cold outside. So if you're up fly tying and you hear some great tunes, check out our Spotify Remote No Pressure Radio, the fly tying radio. So welcome to the podcast. Let's light the fire. Today on the Remote No Pressure Podcast, we have Oliver White. Thank you for joining us today, Oliver.
Glad to be here, and looking forward to it. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. Before we get started, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're up to these days?
Yeah, I think the short answer is I'm kind of one of the lucky guys that gets to make a living fishing. So that means I do lots of little things to create, a living and a mix of the things that I really love. So my primary gig is still I'm a partner and I run 2 lodges in the Bahamas. I have Abaco Lodge on Abaco and Bears Lodge in South Andros. That's my main job and where I spend a lot of my time. I do write for Fly Fisherman. I have a column there on adventure travel, which kind of ties into the other part of things I really love to do, which is hosting groups, guiding, particularly in obscure and weird places. I'm also on the board of IndieFly, which is a nonprofit I helped found with Al Perkinson at Sims, where we work with indigenous people and try to teach them how to run and own their own fly fishing businesses with the idea that if they can benefit economically, the conservation becomes very intuitive for them as a result.
I was reading about that on your website, Oliver, and that's fantastic. That's awesome. Before we get to where you are now, how did you get started in fly fishing, Oliver?
Yeah, I always fished as a kid. My father's not an angler, but even when I was a young kid, I was just way into fishing, not fly fishing, but whatever. The little Zebco 404, cane pole, whatever it was, and I loved to fish as a child. Kind of started dabbling in fly fishing, as a young teenager. My uncles do it. But really the turning point for me was when I was in college. I had a really bad skiing accident. Actually, I broke my back, my pelvis, my hip, my sacrum, just really debilitating. And I missed a whole year of school. And I was also stuck in a bed, in a back brace and a walker and just really miserable. And one of the few things that I could do is I would go outside with my walker and cast my fly rod. It was just kind of one of the few things to get me outside. And, I found a lot of good in that rhythmic casting, and just kind of mixing up the monotony of what I had going on at the time. And so that was a big transition for me where, from being a multi-versed outdoorsman, skiing, climbing, rafting, fishing, all of those things, to really fishing being the primary focus. And that pushed me to get a job at a fly shop in my hometown in Boone, North Carolina, with really the the goal at that point was just to get a bro deal, to be able to get some equipment, because I was into the fishing and I was a broke college student. And I kind of got thrown into guiding from there. And it really wasn't intentional, but I liked it and did well at it. The outfit that I worked for there was run by two brothers. One of them would go to Alaska for the summer and do a float trip down the Connecticut River, and the other one would go to the Bahamas and teach a bone fishing school. So that segued me into the kind of international and traveling part of the sport, and it just kind of kept going from there. And so I was guiding as I finished college in the summers, and when I finished school, I kind of continued, and I got a job working for Nervous Waters down at Cal Toppin in Tierra del Fuego. Went down there. Carter Andrews was one of the first clients down there, and he's like, you can't go back to North Carolina after guiding here. He got me a job in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and it just kind of kept going from there. And that whole time, I never really expected to do this for a living. Right, it was always something I looked at as something I really enjoyed, but I thought it was always going to be a stage in my life. I always anticipated going back to graduate school, whether it was to go get an MBA or go get a JD or whatever, and transition to a more traditional corporate career. And when I was guiding down in Tierra del Fuego, I had a guy show up who'd never fished before, which was not something that typically happens there. And he ran a hedge fund in New York, and he was at an auction, and they told him it was the best fishing lodge in the world, and he bought it, and he flew down there for a week of fishing, and I guided him for the week. And at the end of the week, he offered me a job to come work for him in New York. And as a fishing guide, you often get these offers from clients, and generally I think of them as pretty insincere. But when I got back to Wyoming, I met him in January. I got back to Wyoming in April, May, and there was a box in my house full of books and a letter just saying, you should come work for me, read these books, and give me a call. And I was booked for the summer already. I guided all summer. I read the books, and ended up taking them up on this offer and flying to New York, having never been. I have a philosophy degree. I have no financial background at all, and flew to New York to go be an analyst at a big time firm. And so I spent a couple of years doing that, which I went with an expectation of not really enjoying the work or the city or the office or any of those things. And the reality was, I loved the job, and I even loved New York. But a couple of years into it, guy I was working for is Bill Ackman. He still runs Pershing Square Holdings, which is, just a remarkably successful place. And, Bill pushed me to go to business school. And it was really that moment of stepping back from being very focused on performing and trying to look a little more holistically and being a little more introspective, which is my general nature of filling out applications to go to business school, that made me decide that really wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. So I went into Bill's office and I told him that. I don't want you to take this the wrong way. I love what I do, and I really appreciate the opportunity, but I'm just not sure that this is what I want to do. I don't want to wake up and be 50 and be loaded, but be this very one-dimensional person. And that's what it takes for me to be successful in this space. And then the type of guy Bill is, he just said, great, what do you want to do? And I really hadn't thought that far. So, my gut reaction, my instinct was, man, I want to get back outside, and I want the adventure, but I want to be able to make a real living and not just be a fishing guide. And he said, great, go find it, and I'll backstop it. And that was really what transitioned me from being just a fishing guide to being a little more entrepreneurial. And that's also how I ended up in the Bahamas. I was looking for an investment that I could grow and be an owner in a business, and I found a great piece of real estate in Abaco that had never been a lodge before, that, I kind of went all in. I took everything I had and put in it, and Bill invested, and I brought in the Nervous Waters guys that I worked for in Argentina, and that's really where we are today.
One of my first questions for you was, that I have on my list here is, tell us the story of Abaco Lodge and how you get started. Because according to your website, I mean, you started that thing from scratch, and so I'm assuming it has a pretty near and dear place to your heart. Am I right?
Yeah, it's funny. I have a lot going on in my life right now, and getting ready to be a father and giving a lot of thought just to where I am and what I need. And, one of the things that comes to mind is balance, right? This idea of trying to get a better work-life balance. I'm generally all consumed by whatever I'm working on. I enjoy work. I love what I do, and I always have. And I probably don't do a great job balancing my life. But then I look back at the moments of my life where I've been happiest, and they've been the times where I'm the most unbalanced. And it's the times where there is something going on that is all consuming. And, going to Abaco and building that was definitely one of those moments. I was in way over my head. I didn't know what I was doing. I bought a piece of property that had buildings on it, but it needed complete renovation. It needed construction. None of these were skills that I had. And I put myself on this incredible timeline just arbitrarily of just saying, all right, I can do this in a year, get this done, and make it successful. And we're a couple months into it. And this was back in 2008. And it was the first year that ESPN was doing the series called Pirates of the Flats. It was kind of the first year of that. And they were looking for a location, and it got on their radar that this was under construction, and they decided they wanted to do it. And so my plan was in October of 08 to open in October of 09, give myself, a full 12 months to get everything up and going. These guys said, hey, we want to film. We want to do it at your new place. And we want to film in April. And so, I'm in the Bahamas, and I'm running 2 crews and working obscene hours, even worse than what I was doing when I was working in New York to get this thing up and going. And the Bahamas, as wonderful it is in many respects, is not an easy place to get things done on a deadline. And so just, the constant trials and roadblocks and kind of culminating with, I got kidnapped during the middle of it. And, it was just a whole bizarre string of events that led to a place that now, it has my fingerprints all over it. And it's a really remarkable and special lodge on a spectacular fishery. It's got a really great atmosphere. I mean, I truly love going and not only just seeing what it is now, but watching people have such a great, memorable time, in something that was such an important part of my life for the first few years as I built it and ran it and, helped get it going.
Wow. Can you back up for a second and tell us the kidnapping story? Because we're all wanting to know. You just kind of drop it nonchalantly in the story. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, it's much better over drinks at campfire. So we might bait people. So if you want the kidnapping story in real detail, you're gonna have to come to the lodge and have a few cocktails and hang out by the fire.
You can go to oliverwhitefishing.com.
Yeah. So, but no, I mean, it's kind of an anomaly, right? I mean, it is kind of nonchalant. It was certainly a very memorable event for me, but it's also a little surreal. I'm the only kidnapping victim ever in Abaco, and it was also, man, I would love to tell you that it was this planned, calculated thing by professionals, but really, man, it was the JV team, and I was just the wrong guy at the wrong place. And but I did get tied up and put in my own car, which I would not recommend. I can promise you, I won't get tied up anymore. And the best part of the whole thing is I got an incredible dog out of it. So my partner in Argentina, one of his great childhood friends, had similar incidents in their life, and so he trained German Shepherds, and so he gave me a fully trained protection dog, German Shepherd, that I got as a result of that. So, the dog is so awesome that I might even get kidnapped again to get another one. So,
well, that's great. That's great that you built that. Now, you said earlier that you had no construction experience, but then later in the story, you said you were running 2 crews. I mean, when you get started on this thing, I mean, you arrive there, you're looking at this piece of land and it needs all this work. Did you ever doubt yourself? I mean, what was going on in your mind while you were building Abaco?
Oh yeah, I doubt myself all the time, not just doing construction. But one of the things that happened when I first moved there. So when I bought the property, there were a few buildings and there was a house that had been completed on it, and so I was going to live on site during this whole process. And part of the terms of closing was that everything in the house worked, the water, the electricity. It was like a fully functional deal. And I got there and half the electricity would not turn on. Like, half the lights in the building didn't work or whatever. So I called the people I bought the property from, like, hey, we're having this electrical issue. And they're like, no problem. We're going to send an electrician out. So the guy gets there and I'm kind of walking through, hey, here's what's going on. I checked the breakers, I don't know. And he's got this giant screwdriver and he goes over to the breaker box and he starts poking around. And I'm like, man, that's hot. That's hot. And he's like, I know. And he just starts jamming it in there. And the guy gets shot across the room like 20 feet into a wall. Right. I mean, I've been on the island now for 48 hours and I'm convinced that the guy is dead. And so like, I'm running over there and he like shakes and gets up. I was like, man, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, that happens every now and then. And, so that was my introduction to electricians in the Bahamas. So, I decided really quickly that, just some rational thought and some common sense were going to be enough to get me through. And just, as with most things in life, man, it's about asking the right questions. And so, I do kind of go all in and I like to understand. And so just asking the right questions and making sure that whoever's doing whatever aspect it was can explain it to me in a way that made sense. And if it didn't make sense to me, then asking more questions. And it doesn't mean I didn't make mistakes. Man, I would love to be able to do it all again because I could do it much cheaper, much faster, and much better. But for a 28-year-old kid at the time, man, it all worked out.
Let's talk about going all in because you brought that up. Can you tell us a little bit how have you always been the kind of person to go all in, or what motivates you to just say, cash in my chips, I'm going all in for this thing?
Yeah, man, I've always been very driven and very self-driven, and things do tend to consume me. Like if I got interested in something, yeah, I'm just going to consume everything. But also until it gets boring. And so for most things, I kind of would call myself like an 80%er. Like I want to go in there and learn these things. And then, at about that 80% threshold level, that last 20% of mastering something is really, really tough and not as much fun as the learning curve on the first 80. So I have a whole lot of things that I've put in to get to be an 80%er. And fishing is kind of one of the few that has captivated me to keep pushing. Right. I mean, there's just one of the great things about fly fishing is that you can always improve and you can always learn. And there's always another layer to the onion of how deep you want to go down this rabbit hole. And then I haven't found the threshold yet. I don't know where that's going to live for me, but one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about this is it's something that, at least, I'm going to put 20 years into it now, and I feel like I can easily do another 40. That's a pretty remarkable thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Going all in is so important, and it's just cool to hear, what you said about the last 20% of mastery. You can get the first 80 pretty well, but that last 20% is the hardest for sure.
There's no doubt. Then the last 20%, that juice is really hard to squeeze. And ultimately for me, yeah, man, just throw myself in, let it consume me, kind of figure out where the chips are going to lie. And oftentimes that means bailing out, before you get to the very end and want to keep grinding away. But there are a few things that there's something about it that are so captivating that you just want to stick with it.
On our podcast, Oliver, we talk a lot about the philosophy of fly fishing and not so much about the nuts and bolts, what hatch is going on or technique. We really focus on the philosophy, and that really is our heart of our podcast. And one of the things on your Facebook, on your not your Facebook page, but on your website at oliverwhitefishing.com, you said something on the very first page. You said, "I've seen how it changes the angler, how connecting to wild fish and unspoiled landscapes affects each and every one of us." Can you tell us how fly fishing and fishing changes the angler?
One of the things that I repeat often as I'm guiding and entertaining people is one of the things that I think makes fly fishing truly special is it requires just enough concentration that you can't go anywhere else, right? So your brain is very focused on the task at hand, which is cracking into this fish's brain and figuring out how to catch it. At the same time, it's not a very mentally taxing challenge. So it's a very kind of peaceful mental state. And so there's a degree of relaxation that happens there that I think is really hard to find in today's world. And then you combine that with, especially when you talk about trout fishing, but really most of the fishing I do all over the world is, you don't really fly fish in ugly places. And the places that fish the best are these pristine and perfect moments or pristine and perfect places. And so that's part of why the travel bug gets me so much. But they all kind of loop together. And then the other thing that I see that happens, which isn't unique to fishing, but I think just spending time outdoors, which is something that people at large need to do more of, is nature's this amazing thing. And if you spend enough time outside, you get to witness these moments of perfection, these little fleeting moments where everything comes together, where the sun is going down and the bugs are hatching and the whole river is rising, and that big fish that could never be caught puts his guard down a little bit, right? Those happen, right? And they don't happen all the time, and you have to earn that. And the only thing you can do to earn it is to put in your time. And I think that most anglers and most outdoorsmen, whatever their pursuit would be, are chasing these moments. They see enough of them to know that they exist, and they know that there are going to be more of them, but you just never know when it's going to happen, and you just keep trying to put yourself in these places where they can happen. And, a couple examples of things that have really touched me to know how much fly fishing has impacted people. Well, one of them happened in this last year. I was at a trade show, which is really a very boring thing to be in this giant box with no windows. It's very counter to what fly fishing is, but it's part of the deal. But, you're sitting there and you're in a booth peddling fishing trips in my case. And I had a gentleman walk up to me and he said, "Oliver, you won't remember me." He said, "But you took me and my son fishing on our first fishing trip, 10, 15 years ago." He's like, "And it changed our lives." He's like, we have, we fish together all the time, and it's become just part of who we are and what we do. And it was really because of this time that we spent on the river with you and how excited you were about it. And that was probably one of the most touching things that had ever happened, right? Just to think of someone who I honestly didn't remember. And, so it wasn't a memorable day on my spectrum. But for here, guys, to not only remember it a decade later, but to have kept tabs on me and what I've been doing, and to feel enough gratitude to come up and tell me this story, I find pretty remarkable. And it relates back to, as a fishing guide, people spend their most valuable time with you, right? This is part of their identity, and those trips that they take are the things that they look forward to the most in the year. And so as I go and visit, clients that have become friends, and you're in their homes and their offices, and the pictures on the wall are time that they spent with you, it's really, you don't want to, I take people to catch fish and let them go. So, you don't, it's really not that serious. But at the same time, you, the time they spend with you is very valuable to them. And it's very important to respect that and try to maximize it. And those are the things that kind of drive me to kind of continue to get better at what I do.
Going to the office and seeing their picture, that's got to be pretty humbling that you could be a part of that. That's just really cool.
No, it's remarkably cool. And then you combine it with the people that this sport attracts are generally the movers and shakers of the world, right? You know, especially the type of fishing that I love to do, and it's expensive, and it's expensive both in dollars and time, right? So the people that have that, you know, they and choose to spend it in that manner, they are generally very interesting people, and interesting people. You know, when you can surround your friend group with interesting people, you know, good things happen.
And going to New York and then going back out as a guide and starting the lodge and whatnot, I mean, it's completely different. Um, but what you said about chasing, you know, you mentioned earlier about the people are chasing those moments when everything is perfect in the wilderness, you know, or outdoors when the river is perfect and the river is rising. I mean, it's a very romantic thought, you know, but that's what all these outdoorsmen are chasing. But in the city, they're chasing something else, you know, but we're all chasing something. And that's interesting how you made the choice and that you were, I don't know how old you were, but you were wise enough. I think you said 28 or whatever to look inside and say, wait, I don't want to do this my whole life. I can't live in New York. I had to do something in the outdoors. So that takes some wisdom for a 28-year-old kid, you know, person to say. So
Yeah, I would love to claim it was wisdom, but it really might have just been a little bit of luck and a little bit of naivety. I mean, the honest answer is a few more years in New York, making a little bit more money would have been very helpful. But you know, I look at where I am now, and you know, I'm incredibly wealthy in a lot of ways that are not financial.
hmm.
And and one of the greatest things, honestly, you know, as I think about all of it, right? I mean, I have a lot of doubt, and I have a lot of existential doubt often, right? I mean, it happens, you know, generally at least once or twice a year as I severely doubt, you know, the path I'm on in life, you know, and part of that is the luxury of opportunity in that I can do what I do now, but I can also go and do other more lucrative type careers, and often I'm turning those opportunities down still today. You know, there's a real thought process there for me on what's important in the world, and unfortunately, dollars are easy to keep track of, and that's a very easy thing for people. And I think one of the problems in New York is it's the only thing that people really use to value what they're doing. And it's a lot harder to place a value on what the experience is, you know, what it means to do what I do and spend so much time in unusual places. And you know, I mean, I find incredible value there, but it's not a measurable value. And so to try to balance that with still making a living and you know, and having a more traditional life all at the same time, man, is a real challenge for me, and continues to be. And ultimately, I always kind of come back to, if I had all the money in the world, right? I mean, if I had Bill Ackman's money, the guy that I used to work for, right? I'd be doing exactly what I do now. I'd sit in the front of the plane and and probably, you know, guide a little less and fish a little bit more. But ultimately, you know, it's a great privilege, and feel very fortunate to be able to do what I do, especially at this stage in my life. And, you know, I mean, I'm 37, at least for another week here, and you know, I've been around the world, you know, and really going around the world on any given year, and you know, have all these incredible adventures and all these great friends, and I've had all these wonderful, crazy experiences, and you know, that makes me really wealthy, and in a lot of ways that you can't measure in dollars.
that's great. That's that's so awesome how you're thinking it. it really aligns with everything we believe here on the podcast. Before we go, I got a couple more questions for you. Number one, on your website on oliverwhitefishing.com, I mean, you have pictures from Venezuela, Tanzania. I mean, when you say you've been around the world, I mean, you're not exaggerating. You really go around the world. Can you tell us about your favorite place to fish?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's probably the one I haven't done yet. I'm often asked favorite species, favorite place, and place for me really gets broken into two things that I really love. And I love the flats, man, and whether that's in the Bahamas or the Seychelles or the Florida Keys. I love sight casting and I love being on the flats, and any of those places on any given day is special. And then if you made me pick one, man, you can't go wrong in the Indian Ocean. It's still mainly it's just the diversity is unparalleled, and it's still pristine and relatively intact. And then the other thing that I really love is the jungle, and which is kind of completely counter to that. I love the indigenous cultures and people. I love the feeling of exploration. Whether it's Dorado in Bolivia, the Arapaima in Guyana. I mean, I was just in Bhutan, which is very jungly, for golden mahseer. Those things I really love. I love this, kind of through the forest canopy, looking for strange, obscure fish, and then people you meet along the way. Because anymore, so much more of it isn't the fishing itself, right? The fishing is just the thread that ties the rest of these adventures together. But it's the place and the culture and the people and the environment, and the fish are really just a bonus.
That's awesome. Can you tell us, and the last question I have for you is, can you tell us a little about Indy Fly and what has happened and gone on in Guyana?
Yeah, so of everything I do, Indy Fly is my favorite, right? And it's purely volunteer. I mean, it is a true 501c3. We have one paid employee who's our executive director that he goes out there and pounds the pavement, keeps all our legal stuff straight, and he does all the really heavy lifting, and the rest of us get to do the fun part. And the fun part is really the concept that, and it really all stemmed from Guyana. But the concept is basically that in these remote corners of the world, indigenous cultures are very in tune with their environment, and the only real asset that they have is their environment. And if you can help them figure out how to monetize that asset in a sustainable sport fishing manner, fly fishing, then they will protect that place in perpetuity. Right? If you just tell them they should protect it because it's special, it's hard for them to wrap their heads around that, because first and foremost, they have to live and they have to eat. And, the idea that it's going to go away is very hard to get your head around. But if you can demonstrate to them that there's value in protecting it, because people will come and spend money to catch fish and let them go, they will be, conservation just becomes part of their culture, and it happens very quickly. And Guyana is the best example of this that I've ever seen, in that, and really that was where Indy Fly was born from. I mean, the Guyana project started before Indy Fly existed. But Al Perkinson, who is now at Sam's, but at the time he was working for Costa Del Mar, he had heard about the fish, the Arapaima, and wanted to see if he could be caught on fly, and wanted to make a little film. And he asked me to go down and explore and try to do that. I didn't even know what an Arapaima was. And we went down to the jungle, brought a couple friends, Matt Brewer, who continues to run the Guyana. He's the Guyana country director for Indy Fly now. He also guides in Montana. And I brought another friend that guided with me in North Carolina as well as Wyoming, Nathan Weber. And we went down and spent a couple weeks exploring, trying to figure out the fishing. And not only did we figure out how to catch these things and have an incredible experience, but we became incredibly enamored with the people. I mean, they're still, if they want to eat, they have to kill every day. So, they get up and they have to hunt for their breakfast, and that's still how it is today. But they were so in tune with their environment, and they were so incredibly giving with their knowledge. And it was just a wonderful place to spend time with them and watch how well they mastered their universe and how quickly they adapted to these strange fly rods that they had never seen before. And it was also really apparent that the world was changing and encroaching, and they needed to figure out how to earn money for the first time, right? This is the most remote indigenous tribe village in Guyana. They're 250 miles from the nearest road, and the other villages had already kind of sold out, right? And by selling out, what did they do? They're doing extractive type things, again, because the only asset that they had, the only thing they could monetize was their land. So other villages were mining for gold and open pit mercury mines, mining for bauxite, harvesting the timber, harvesting the birds for the pet industry. And here was this more remote place that was able to buy a little bit more time just because of their natural geography. But the world was reaching them. And the men in the village were having to leave and go work in these other villages to go to the gold mines, to earn money, to come back to support their family. But really all they wanted to do was live at home and take care of themselves.
Right.
And if you could create that opportunity for them, man, they were all over it. And they had already taken a conservation mindset. They were trying to protect what they had with the idea that ecotourism would bring people and dollars to their community. And they were getting a handful of people coming to look, birders and just, wildlife people, but ultimately those guys are not willing to spend the money that a traveling angler to catch the largest scaled freshwater fish in the world will.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you fast forward that, and the year before we started, the whole village, which is about 300 people, made about $1,000. And this year, they're going to do, about 120 grand in revenue from taking people fly fishing and catch and release.
Wow.
And that's really, in a 7-year thing. And what that really, as you look at that, what that really means is, it's a village of 300 people, about 160 of that is children. So you have 140 adults. 90 of them work in the fly fishing program that really only runs 6 weeks a year, right? So we employ most of the village. Not only do we provide employment, but then the income that's left over has been given to the village council, and then they redeploy that to help everyone in the village. They put in water for the village. They put in satellite internet. They funded the schools. They funded school lunches for the kids. They've brought in nurses and dentists for medical care. They also now have a residual pool of money to send people from the community to get medical care when it's needed. And so, in a relatively short period of time, you've had a multi-generational impact in the quality of life. And as you talk to the villagers there, the one thing they always tell you is, man, it's better for their kids, right? That's really all they want, right? They just want a better life, a better education for their own children. And that's all happening from this sport fishing. And then to tie it back to conservation, what you see happening is the whole village embraces this idea of catch and release and protecting what they have. And a great example of that is prior to this program, there was harvesting of arapaima. It was illegal, but there was a demand. So they were able to, catch these fish, salt them, and dry them and sell them in Brazil on the market, for pennies on the pound. And a couple of years ago, there was a big drought. So Guyana sits on the Guyana Shield, which at one point was part of the Amazon. So you can think of it as the rainforest. And so between dry season and rainy season, the river height fluctuates 40 feet. So in low season, the river drops down, and then when the rainy season comes, the whole river will come up 40 feet. It floods over the banks into the jungle, and all of the fish move into the jungle to spawn and feed. As that river starts to drop, the arapaima choose to stay in what become these landlocked ponds, and that's where we catch them. Mm. And a couple of years ago, there was a really big drought. So when the rainy season came, it didn't provide a flush of fresh water to the ponds and let the fish move around. And so there was one pond in particular that was literally drying up because the river just didn't reach it during the rainy season. And I mean, we IndieFly, none of us were even there. We got this update after it had happened, but the village organized. They sent 30 or 40 men go and hike back to this pond, which is about 2 kilometers. They would catch an arapaima in a net, put it in a canoe, right? So this is a fish that weighs anywhere from 100 to 300 pounds.
Wow.
They'd catch it, put it in the canoe, fill the canoe with water, drag it 2 kilometers back to the river to release it. And they did that 18 times, right? Huh. And they caught 18 fish and relocated them to the river just so they had a chance to live, because they recognized the value of the fish alive versus just going and harvesting these 18 fish and selling them on the market. And that decision was made entirely on their own. And that was a systemic cultural shift in the view of what their land is and how it provides for them that has happened in a relatively short amount of time. And I can't think of a better example to show kind of the power of creating local economies with fishing for conservation than that.
That's an unbelievable story. I mean, no government intervention, no EPA telling them that we need to transfer fish. They took it upon themselves. They understood the value of that fish, and they took it upon themselves to do that. What an incredible story, Oliver. That's great. If someone wanted to be a part of that, to be a part of what you're doing there with Indy Fly, you said you're a 501c3. What would people need to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, indyfly.org. Dollars matter, right? We're learning this nonprofit game, and right now we have a lot of great help. We have a lot of great people. We have a lot of projects that we're trying to get off the ground, and ultimately the first threshold for all of them is getting some funding. And so that's the easiest way to help us the most at the moment, and everything matters, man. Whatever you want to chip in would be great. And if you have some unique skill sets, we're happy to take your time as well and put you to work a little bit. And we're also looking for ideas and places where, these perfect little places where you have a small community where you can touch a lot of people and have a huge environmental impact. We're still looking for more and more places to put the Indy Fly footprint down.
Well, that's great. We'll put a link up on our blog and on our website to oliverwhitefishing.com and also to the Indy Fly charitable organization as well, so people can check that out. If people want to book trips and all that, can they do that through your website at oliverwhitefishing.com? Or? Yeah.
Absolutely right. Anything fishing related that I can help with, right? I still, I field all that myself. You want to go on some crazy adventure to, Tanzania, Lesotho, Oman, Sudan, any of those things, I'd be glad to help you make it happen. You want to come to the Bahamas, the same thing. You want to come to Guyana and catch an arapaima, just shoot me an email. And if I don't do it directly, I will make sure that you're in touch with the right people to get it happen.
Well, thank you very much for spending some time with us, Oliver.
All right, Jeff. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Oliver, and thank you for joining us this week on the Remote No Pressure podcast. Don't forget to check out our website at remotenopressure.com, sign up for our mailing list, and until next week, go fishing.